Hi, I'm Mickey McGuire. This is Mickey McGuire Photo on YouTube, and we have MickeyMcGuirePhoto.com on the World Wide Web. I want to talk about framing your shot. Landscape is my passion. I mentioned that in the other video. And really, if you've had a chance to play around very much in the wild and take great pictures of landscapes, you know, there's waterfalls and there's things that people want to do and you know, take pictures and go back home. What started me with landscape was really that I love the outdoors. And as a kid, I shot medium format cameras because I sort of inherited those and started using those and shooting rolled film, and I was ecstatic when we get the film back from Kodak and I could see the results of my labor, so to speak. And I shot that up until 1976 when I switched to 35mm film. What landscape enabled me to do is I would go out in the woods and go hiking and see all these beautiful places that my family never went to. And although they liked the beauty of nature, they were not nature people. They were not the kind of people who go out and hike around trails or anything. My father was busy all the time, pretty much living his job. And my mother she didn't like being in trees, kind of feeling a claustrophobia maybe or something like that. I don't know what. I wasn't worried about it. I love being in trees and being out in the wilderness and hiking places, climbing mountains and taking pictures all the way so I could actually go back home and say, look at these beautiful places. And when I was on my own, I would go over to their place occasionally with pictures that I had taken and show them what I had and where I'd been and all these beautiful natural settings. And I actually started selling a lot of photography, and I did articles about photography and took pictures to sell. And articles that I wrote were easier to get published if I had the pictures to go with them. Since I was a photographer, I could do both. The thing about photography and publishing is that most people, they don't understand this, but a publisher wants your images and what you think is great and may want to crop this way or that way. A photographer expects the publisher a lot of times to take what they give them, but the publisher has special designs, so to speak, and needs and formats to which they adhere. So if you give a photograph to a publication and you've cropped it already, you may get a rejection if they can't use it because of the way it's cropped. So you have to understand, like for the cover of a magazine, you're talking about a vertical format, not a horizontal format. You're talking about something where you need some space for them to put the verbiage of what's in the magazine. So the idea is if you're going to frame your images, try to frame every shot you can within the confines of your format of your camera. Like when I was shooting medium format a lot, it's a 6 by 6 centimeter, or what we used to call 2 1/4 format in the United States. And being a square image, you have to look at every element that's in the picture. So when you compose a shot, what is there? Is it too busy? Is there stuff there that doesn't need to be there? If you're taking a picture of somebody, is there a picture on the wall coming out of the top of their head, or a candle, or something like that? So you want to make sure you position people in a way that is pleasing to the eye. And the elements in your design, if you're outdoors, do they lead the viewer to the subject matter of your photograph? So what I wanted to do was emphasize the fact that in the old days, with film, you tried not to crop images, because if you do, you're cutting away part of the image. Well, with digital, it's become so popular that on some forums online, someone will say, you know, I put this image up, where should I crop this? It's like, well, why do you want to crop it? I mean, really, if you plan your images right, and you're shooting landscape in particular, you shouldn't have to crop an image. If you can't take the time and aim and set up your shot without having to rely on cropping it to make it better when you get home, then really you need to take a little more time and prepare your shot. The reason I say that is, let's say you have a 16 megapixel camera. Well, if you crop the image down to, let's say, 6 or 8 megapixel equivalent, what you're really doing is you're taking an image that could have been published, let's say, if it was a good image, and you're knocking it down to the size that a publisher today doesn't even want it. What you need to do is start looking at your camera and saying, okay, I'm shooting a 35 millimeter equivalent full frame sensor camera. Where is every element within my image when I click the shutter button? Do I have anything there that is taking the eye away from the subject? Where is my subject located? If it's an animal like a white-tailed deer, it should be facing into the middle of your image, not off the page, so to speak. If it's going to be published in a magazine, that's what they're looking for. They want the image looking into the magazine, not off the page. Same thing with people. If you're getting a picture of the President of the United States, you don't want him looking off the frame. You want him looking into the frame, or straight at you from the center of the frame, that type of thing. The other thing is you don't want to divide a picture in half. Let's say you have the Eiffel Tower. It's much more interesting to put it a little bit to the side if you're shooting horizontally, and have people standing there to the right if you're going to have that, so that they're not blocking the view of the Eiffel Tower, which is kind of like the novelty of being in Paris. So if you're going to shoot the Eiffel Tower by itself, turn the camera vertically. Get a nice tight framed image and show it top to bottom, and you get a great shot, that type of thing. So it takes a little setup and rethinking to do this. But if you're constantly cropping images to make them better, I suggest you start looking ahead of time, slow down a little bit, and set up your shot a little better to begin with, and you don't have to worry about it. Now, there are exceptions. Let's say you're photographing in a canyon and you got some subject on the other side of the canyon you're photographing, because it'd be a great shot, but there's no way to get there short of like a day's travel on foot, or you have no choice because let's say it's not passable at all. There's a raging river there and you want to shoot something on the other side. You may have to crop an image like that. That's understandable. Or if you're photographing birds in flight, a lot of people leave a lot of extra room so they can follow the bird easier, and then you just crop it to get closer. I understand that too. You can't help it sometimes when you're doing that. And even sports action, the same kind of thing. Now golf, you can get a tight frame shot. Football, not so much. So there's times that I would say it's give and take. But we're talking landscape here. And with landscape, I really honestly believe that if you're cropping images, you're cutting away part of the frame that you shouldn't be cutting away. Because you get a better shot if you look at that and plan accordingly and use all of the pixels available in your camera. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. It just takes a little more time to do. Frame that shot. My book was all about framing images so that the composition is really good. All of the things within the design you're creating, in essence, in the camera, belong there. Now, once in a while you're going to get something like, let's say you photograph a rock formation and there's a harsh spot to the left because the sunlight is hitting it and it's blown out. You're going to crop that off because it looks terrible and you can't recover from that. I understand that. That's going to happen. I've had plenty of times I've just deleted an image and retaken it under different lighting because of blowout that can occur whenever you're in an area like that, unless you're carrying a bunch of neutral density filters or using a polarizer that may eliminate some of the glare, that type of thing. So you have to plan accordingly. So when you go out to photograph landscape, be aware that probably the filter you would use most often would be a polarizer. I know some guys that just leave the polarizer on the camera because they shoot nothing but landscape, and they're always going to put the sun off their shoulders so they can get a nice blue sky. Some people overdo it also. They turn the polarizer, circular polarizer, to the point where it's so rich in blue that the image prints way too dark when you go to print it on one of the modern printers. So you need to think about that too and back it off a little, or you're going to go into your software when you get home and you're going to be lightening the image anyway. So you have to consider those kind of things. But when you're taking pictures, what you want to do is slow down a little bit, look at everything in the viewfinder, see if there's something there that is a distraction. Telephone lines, whatever it is. If you have a very bland, grayish sort of sky that's featureless, what you want to do is probably set up the shot so you're not seeing very much sky, if at all, in the image, and maybe use a polarizer to bring out a little bit of color so that you have something there that's worth keeping, but minimize the amount of sky in your frame. Put more foreground instead. So these are things to think about here when you're framing a shot. We're going to get more into that in the future. So what I did, this is just a preface for what's coming down the line. And the reason is we're going to be looking at images. We're going to talk about the quality of an image and what makes the image special or what makes the image work. And we're going to compare that to common problems that people have when it comes to photography. So we can eliminate those things and give you the upper hand when you get out there. If you're armed with information to begin with and you know how to achieve the things that you want to achieve when you're out there, you're going to have a higher success ratio. I'm going to walk away now, basically leave you with those thoughts for the day, but before I end this, I just want to say one other thing. Don't be discouraged if you get results that are mixed. That happens. The longer you shoot, the more images you're creating, the higher your success ratio will be in the long run. I take a lot of time before I shoot, so I shoot a lot less images in a day than some people. And I will just tell you this brief story, and then I'm going to close it down for this episode. Peter Essick is a National Geographic photographer. I spent one summer with Peter Essick up in the Catskills quite a bit, looking for a particular image for an article in the magazine on wild trout fisheries. This was many, many years ago. I asked Pete at the time how many rolls of film they shoot on a typical weekend. And this was before digital cameras really were good enough to switch to digital for guys like Pete. He said 175 36 exposure rolls on a typical weekend. So I said, how many of the images that you captured does National Geographic use out of the 175 rolls? He said on average about 3. Let that soak in for a minute. 175 36 exposure rolls of film, and from that National Geographic uses on average 3 images. It's not that the other images were bad. The point is they're getting the cream of the crop. Now Pete is one of the best pros in the world, and this is what he does. You think about that. So never be discouraged. We're talking about learning your craft, and every day is a new adventure. Every day there's something more to learn. I've been doing this since 1976 in 35mm format and digital. And there's still things that I learn from time to time out there in the field, because there's always new adventures, new conditions, and things like that that make things just interesting. And that's the way it should be. It's a growth experience constantly. And with all the gear coming out right now, I can tell you this is an exciting time to be taking landscape photography seriously. It's come such a long way with digital, and we are so far ahead of where we were just 10 years ago. It's amazing. So this is a great time to get involved. There's some fantastic cameras out there, even in the consumer market, professional features on consumer cameras. The Pentax K70 is a great example. It has a great sensor. It has anti-shake protection. It's a weatherproof lens, so to speak, or weather-resistant camera. And, you know, it's just amazing the technology that has gone from the professional side of the world to the consumer cameras. Canon, Nikon, Sony, same thing. There's amazing technology out there. No matter what you shoot, don't give up. Keep learning, keep working at it, and frame that shot. Mickey McGuire, your frame the shot guy. MickeyMcGuirePhoto.com and Mickey McGuire Photo on YouTube. Thanks for